Okay, let's try this again. Just tell me. Am I completely insane, or is this the most ridiculous nuclear level overreaction in the history of relationships? Seriously, I need a reality check. I know I messed up. I said something awful, I get it, I'm not a monster. But it was a joke. A stupid, dark, completely stress fueled joke that just slipped out after a 17-hour workday. And for that, Kieran, my partner of 5 years, decides to just detonate our entire life. 5 years, gone, poof, over one goddamn sentence. You have to understand, we live in different universes that just happen to share a zip code. I'm a junior associate at a law firm that's basically a Shark Tank disguised with better carpeting. My life is measured in 6-minute billable increments, and I live on stale coffee, cortisol, and the constant, gnawing fear of being fired. And Kieran, he's a high school history teacher. He's amazing at it, the kids adore him, and he comes home by 4, smelling like chalk dust and contentment. He wouldn't know real soul-crushing pressure if it sued him for malpractice. I'm not saying his job is easy, but come on, the stakes are different, and I guess I just needed him to see that for once, but he didn't. And now I'm sitting in my apartment, surrounded by a silence that's louder than any argument we ever had, and I just can't shake this burning feeling that this isn't all on me. It can't be, right? My life at the firm was a pressure cooker with a faulty valve. You know the culture, it's this toxic blend of Ivy League bravado and raw primal fear. It's all about billable hours, kissing the right asses, and making sure your name is on the winning side of every case, no matter the human cost. I was drowning. Every single day was a battle. I'd come home with my shoulders so tight they felt like concrete, my brain a buzzing hive of legal jargon and passive-aggressive emails from senior partners. It was a constant, grinding war of attrition against my own sanity. And Kieran, he was my haven. He was the calm in my storm. I'd walk in the door, a frayed nerve ending in a pantsuit, and he'd be there, maybe grading papers on the couch with some obscure documentary about the Ottoman Empire playing in the background. He'd make dinner, listen to me vent about my sociopathic boss, and rub my feet until the tension finally started to seep out of me. He was patient, supportive, the very definition of a good man. I knew that, I really did, but that's the thing about pressure cookers, right? The steam has to go somewhere, and more often than not, it went in his direction. Little things at first. Snapping at him for humming while he cooked, complaining that he didn't understand the gravity of my work. And he just took it. He'd get this quiet look on his face, but he'd never fight back. I should have seen the warning signs, I really should have. There was this one time, months ago, we were out with another couple, friends of his. The wife, Amelia, was making these little digs at her husband all night. Oh, don't mind Greg, his idea of a big financial decision is switching from regular to premium gas, she'd said with a laugh. Everyone chuckled politely, but I saw Kieran's smile tighten. His whole posture changed. Later that night in the car, he was unusually quiet. I finally asked him what was wrong. He pulled over, turned to me, and his eyes were so serious it almost scared me. Blythe, he said, his voice low. I need you to know something. I can't be in a relationship where people tear each other down for sport. Even as a joke, he told me about his childhood, about how his mother, a brilliant but deeply unhappy woman, had verbally shredded his father for years. She called him a failure, a burden, a man with no ambition. She did it at the dinner table in front of the kids with this casual, cutting cruelty. She wore him down to nothing, Kieran said, and I could hear the echo of that old pain in his voice. She made him believe he was worthless. I watched it happen. And I swore to myself I would never, ever let that be my life, not from my partner. I remember just nodding, saying all the right things. Of course, honey, I'd never do that to you. That's horrible, but did I really hear him? I mean, really absorb it, honestly? No, to me it was just a sad story about his parents, it wasn't about us. It was a theoretical red line, drawn in a country I never planned on visiting. God, I was such an idiot. The day it all fell apart was a Tuesday. Of course, it was a Tuesday. Tuesdays are the worst day of the week, just a grim, endless slog with no weekend in sight. I'd been at the office since 6 a.m., prepping for a deposition in a case that had been sucking the life out of me for months. It was a high-stakes corporate mess, and my senior partner, a man whose heart was probably a fossilized piece of granite, had decided I was the designated scapegoat for anything that went wrong. And naturally, something went wrong. A key document was misfiled. It wasn't even my fault, but my name was on the chain of custody, so his wrath descended upon me like a biblical plague. I got home a little after 10, feeling like I'd been physically beaten. My head was pounding, my stomach was in knots, and every muscle ached with a unique combination of stress and exhaustion. The apartment smelled like garlic and roasted chicken. Kieran was at the stove, humming softly to himself, plating dinner. He turned around with that gentle smile of his. Hey, you. Rough day. That was it. That simple, kind question was the match to the fuse. I dropped my briefcase on the floor with a thud that made him jump. Rough day? I laughed, but it was a brittle, ugly sound. A rough day is when you get a paper jam in the faculty photocopier, Kieran. I'm currently living through a professional public execution. He put the plates down, his smile faltering. Okay, I'm sorry, I just meant you look exhausted. I saved you dinner. I'm not hungry, I snapped, walking past him to the fridge and pulling out a bottle of wine. I didn't even bother with a glass. He followed me, his presence feeling like an intrusion on my personal bubble of misery. Blythe, talk to me. What happened? What happened is that my career is hanging by a thread because of someone else's incompetence. What happened is that I'm killing myself in that goddamn office, working 18-hour days for what? So I can come home to someone who thinks the biggest problem in the world is that the 10th graders aren't retaining the nuances of the Treaty of Versailles. He recoiled, his face clouding over. That's not fair. Fair? The word just exploded out of me, dripping with a year's worth of pent-up resentment. You want to talk about fair? It's not fair that I'm the only one pulling us forward. God, sometimes I feel like I'm trying to drag the whole world up a hill by myself. And you're just the dead weight I'm dragging along with me. It was out. The words hung in the air between us, thick and poisonous. For a split second, I even thought it was kind of a darkly funny, hyperbolic line, the kind of thing my work friends would say to vent. But Kieran, his face just collapsed. All the color drained from it. He didn't look angry, he didn't look hurt. He looked like I just told him his dog had died. He stared at me for a long moment, his eyes wide and vacant. Then, without a single word, he turned around, walked into our bedroom, and quietly shut the door. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. It wasn't just the absence of noise, it was a living, breathing presence in the apartment. It filled up the spaces between the furniture, it seeped into the walls. I stood there in the kitchen, the uncorked wine bottle still in my hand, my heart hammering against my ribs. I expected him to come storming out, yelling. I expected a fight. I was ready for a fight, I almost wanted one. A fight would have been a release, a way to burn off the toxic energy of the day, but nothing happened. The bedroom door stayed closed. I ate the chicken he'd cooked, standing over the sink like a burglar. It was dry and tasteless in my mouth. I went to bed hours later, crawling under the covers on my side of the bed. He was already there, lying on his back, staring at the ceiling. Neither of us said a word. The next morning, the silence was still there, but it had changed. It had hardened overnight, crystallizing into something cold and sharp. I found him in the living room, sitting on the edge of the armchair, already dressed for work. He had a mug of coffee in his hands, but he wasn't drinking it. He was just waiting for me. We need to talk, he said. His voice was flat, devoid of any emotion at all. I started with my pre-rehearsed apology. Kieran, look, about last night, I was exhausted, I was stressed, I didn't mean it. He held up a hand, and the gesture was so final, so absolute that the words died in my throat. You called me dead weight, he said. It wasn't an accusation, it was a statement of fact, like he was reading an item from a grocery list. It was a figure of speech. A stupid, horrible joke, I don't think that. He finally looked at me and his eyes, God, his eyes, there was no anger there, no fire. Just a profound, bottomless disappointment that was so much worse. My mother used to call my father her burden, he said, his voice still terrifyingly calm. She'd say it at parties, to her friends on the phone. Oh, Richard, he's a good man, but he has no drive, he's the anchor tied to my ankle. She said it so often that eventually he started to believe it. I watched a kind, funny man shrink into a ghost because of those jokes. He stood up and placed his coffee mug on the coaster with surgical precision. I told you that was the one thing, the only thing I could never tolerate. I told you about them, you knew. He looked at me and it felt like he was seeing right through me, seeing all the ugly, stressed out parts of my soul. I can't be with someone who, when they're at their worst, sees me as a liability. The trust is gone, Blythe. Once that's broken, it's just broken. There's no fixing it. And then he said the words, we're done. Just like that, no yelling, no crying, just a quiet clinical amputation of our 5 years together. He picked up his briefcase from by the door and walked out, closing it softly behind him. I just stood there in the middle of the living room, completely and utterly stunned. For the first few hours, I was just numb. I went through the motions of getting ready for work, my brain refusing to process what had just happened. We're done. The phrase just kept replaying on a loop, but it didn't feel real. It felt like a line from a movie, not something that applied to my life. He'd be back tonight, I told myself. He's just cooling off, he's dramatic, he'll realize how insane this is and he'll come home. But when I got back to the apartment that evening, the reality hit me like a physical blow. The first thing I noticed was the empty space on the coat rack where his worn denim jacket always hung. Then I saw the gap on the bookshelf, all his history books gone. His favorite coffee mug wasn't in the dish drainer. I walked numbly into the bedroom. His side of the closet was empty, the drawers were bare, his toothbrush was gone from the bathroom. He had packed up his life and vanished while I was at work. Swiftly, efficiently, completely. That's when the numbness cracked and the anger flooded in. Pure, undiluted rage for one sentence. For one stupid, out-of-line comment made under extreme duress. He was going to throw everything away. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking, and started calling him. Straight to voicemail, I called again, voicemail. After the 10th time, I realized he'd blocked my number, so I started texting. A furious, frantic barrage of messages that I knew he'd probably never even see. You can't just leave, 5 years means nothing to you. This is a ridiculous overreaction, Kieran, you're being childish. I was having the worst day of my life and you're making it all about you. And of course, I said I was sorry, what more do you want from me? Each message was sent with more venom than the last. In my mind, I was the victim here. I was the one under pressure, the one who was suffering. He, with his calm, predictable life, had no right to judge me. He had no right to abandon me when I needed him. My apology was a footnote in a tirade of self-justification. The anger felt good. It felt powerful. It was a shield against the gaping, terrifying hole that had just been blown through the center of my life. It was so much easier to be angry than to be heartbroken. After 2 days of radio silence, my anger started to curdle into a frantic, buzzing panic. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. The silence in the apartment was deafening. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like an accusation. I finally broke down and called Jenna, my best friend. I needed an ally. I needed someone to tell me I was right, that Kieran was being a thin-skinned, unforgiving asshole. I launched into the story, painting myself as the overworked, stressed-out martyr. I made sure to emphasize the 17-hour workday, the tyrannical boss, the sheer weight of my professional world. I told her his final words, his quiet "we're done," expecting a gasp of outrage on my behalf. Can you believe that? I finished, my voice cracking with a mixture of rage and self-pity. He just walked out, blocked my number, 5 years down the drain because of one bad night. On the other end of the line, there was just silence. Not a comforting silence, it was a heavy, awkward pause that stretched on for way too long. Jenna, I said, my stomach twisting, are you there? I'm here, she finally said, and her voice was gentle, which was somehow worse than anything else. Blythe, honey, do you remember a few months ago, when you told me about that night Kieran got so upset after you'd been out with his friends? The question caught me off guard. What? Amelia and Greg, yeah, what about it? You told me what he said in the car about his parents. About his mom, she trailed off, letting me fill in the blank. And suddenly, the memory wasn't just a story anymore. It was a flashing red light I had sped right through. I watched her wear him down to nothing. Blythe, Jenna said, her voice firm but not unkind. You didn't just make a normal, shitty joke. You took the deepest, most painful trauma of his entire life. The thing he explicitly told you was his one absolute deal breaker, and you threw it right in his face. I opened my mouth to argue, to say, but I didn't mean it like that. But the words wouldn't come out. He didn't hear I'm stressed and overworked, she continued, her words landing like stones. He heard his mother's voice coming out of your mouth. You think this is about one bad night? For him, this was his whole childhood nightmare coming true. You weren't just being an asshole, Blythe, you became his monster. Jenna's words didn't just sting. They shattered the whole narrative I'd built around myself. The anger, the self-righteousness, it all just evaporated, leaving behind a cold, hollow ache. I hung up the phone and felt for the first time the true weight of what I had done. He wasn't overreacting. He was protecting himself from me. The next few weeks were a blur of misery. Work was impossible. I'd sit in meetings, staring at spreadsheets, but all I could see was the look on Kieran's face before he walked out the door, the disappointment. I'd come home to the empty apartment, and the quiet was so absolute it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I was adrift. One Saturday, consumed by a desperate need to feel close to him, I started cleaning. A frantic, pointless attempt to impose order on my chaotic life. I was clearing out a bookshelf to make space, pulling out old paperbacks and college textbooks, when my fingers brushed against a folder tucked away at the very back, hidden behind a thick history of the Byzantine Empire. It was one of his. My heart started pounding. I knew I shouldn't look, but I couldn't stop myself. I pulled it out and opened it on the coffee table. It was a travel plan. A meticulously researched day-by-day itinerary for a 3-week trip to Italy. There were printouts of train schedules, museum opening times, links to little family-run restaurants in Tuscany. At the top of the first page, in Kieran's neat handwriting, it said, Blythe's Bar Exam Victory Tour. Tucked into a side pocket of the folder was another printout. It was from a website for custom jewelry. A simple, elegant engagement ring with a small sapphire, my birthstone, set next to the diamond. He'd been planning to propose. He'd been planning a future, a whole beautiful life, while I was seeing him as an obstacle. The man I called dead weight had been quietly building the ship that was meant to carry us both forward. The printout slipped from my fingers. I just sat there on the floor, surrounded by the evidence of a future I had single-handedly destroyed. It was all there in black and white. The love I had taken for granted, the future I had thrown away with one careless, cruel sentence. I called Jenna again later that night. I could hear the concern in her voice when she picked up. "How are you doing?" she asked softly. "I'm fine," I said, my voice sounding unnaturally bright even to my own ears. "Totally fine, you know what they say, plenty of fish in the sea." His loss, right? I was talking tough, putting on the brave face I thought the world wanted to see. But after I hung up, I sat there in the dark, silent living room. The only sound was my own breathing. And I realized with a sudden, gut-wrenching clarity that I couldn't remember what silence sounded like before him. All I could hear was the ghost of his humming, that stupid, off-key little tune he'd hum while making coffee every morning. And God, it was so much louder than the emptiness.